Taiwanese Apple supplier Foxconn aims to double its workforce and investment in India over the coming 12 months. That's according to a company executive. The world's largest contract maker of electronics has been expanding its presence in the world's most populous nation in a bid to move away from China. Foxconn has already invested in manufacturing facilities in southern India, where it employs 40,000 people. And last month, the state of Karnataka said the supplier will invest $600 million in projects there for making iPhone parts and chip-making equipment. For more on that, let's bring in Arvind Panagariya. He's an economist at Columbia University in New York. Welcome to DW. Why does Foxconn want to do that?
Well, multiple factors. India has been rising and the economy is doing well. So it's a good destination for multinationals. But also there is a diversification going on from away from China. And large companies which are operating in China from various parts of the world are looking for an alternative location. Potentially in some sense, India offers the largest market. So it's not just the internal market for the products, but also if they want to then diversify into the components, etc., of what they initially go into manufacture, then the scope for such expansion in India is much larger. I mean, I'm comparing here with countries like Vietnam, other Southeast Asian countries. I think the only other country which has the size is Indonesia, but probably the ecosystem and the growth of India is significantly larger.
Let's talk about how India is stacking up against these other countries here in a second. First, I would like to know the fact that this announcement was made on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's birthday tells us what?
Well, it may be coincidence, or it may very well be orchestrated as well, because, the Prime Minister Modi does pay attention to these details. So it's entirely possible that, for Foxconn also to get the attention of the Prime Minister himself, they chose to announce it on this day.
Now, we heard earlier this year from a state official from the state of Karnataka that Foxconn wants to invest $600 million there in a site or in sites manufacturing iPhone parts and semiconductors. This move or this announcement now that does seem somewhat peculiar, because just last month Foxconn quit a semiconductor joint venture with Indian mining company Vedanta. How does these plans tie in with this exit from this joint venture?
Yeah. So, these things are determined by the specifics of the agreements between the two sides. And while I don't know the details, ultimately, it has got to do with the particular deal that was struck or was being negotiated. I don't think this deal had actually advanced enough to have been concluded. What has happened, it seems to me, is that Vedanta itself is new in this particular space. Vedanta has been in other industries, mostly energy-related industries. And so there may have been this other fear as well as to, whether Vedanta can hack it in this particular space of semiconductors. So I don't know the details, but Foxconn has been in India now for a while. I'm sure in the future also these things will happen, that deals will begin to be negotiated, and perhaps some of them will not come to final conclusion. So I'm not so concerned about that, as long as other deals go on. That is really roughly how I see it.
India wants to position itself as a global manufacturing hub, as many globally operating companies are willing or being forced to look for production sites outside of China. Where does India stand in presenting itself as an alternative to China?
Right. So now India's potential is really huge because of the large workforce. There are also skills available. because these things do require a lot of engineers, and India does produce lots of engineers of various qualities, various skills, etc. From all those perspectives, India is a good place, but it is also a little difficult place still. This is just talking to the investors and entrepreneurs in the country that some of these systems like the taxation, clearances, ease of doing business are still a little bit of work in progress. My sort of hope is that the present government is very vigilant and it is responsive. So as large investors like Foxconn, Samsung, others come in and they ask for better systems, better processes, response will happen. India being a very vibrant democracy, very contentious democracy, is a little slow to change. But luckily, the present government is very vigilant. So it is work in progress, but it will happen, and the rest of the potential is quite good.
But this potential, I mean, it hasn't been there since yesterday. It has been there for years, and India has been trying to monetize this potential for years. There was the Make in India campaign, which has been running for years and actually came to a closure last year. How do you view the progress that India has made in the recent years when it comes to trying to establish itself as a manufacturing hub?
Absolutely. It has been, for me personally, a bit of a frustrating journey. I've been writing on this, for almost 25 years. And many of the things I've been repeating over the 25 years. The process of change has been slower. India's economic reform started way back in 1991. And we are still, not fixed up with the labor laws, for example. New labor laws were enacted by the parliament 5 years ago in 2019. Or 4 years ago, they've still not been notified, which means they have still not been implemented. So there is a slow change in India, but definite progress has happened. There is no question that India of today is very different from what it was 20 years ago. And there is in the government, as I said, a willingness to respond. Even in Karnataka, for example, recently the Apple had actually complained about some of the labor laws, which the state could change with the permission from the center. This had to do with 12-hour shifts and allowing women night shifts, and those changes were made. So response has been happening, and so in this sense, and you can see that actually, initially at least, some of these companies have gone to Vietnam. But they also see that Vietnam, after all, with a 90 million population, is relatively small. And therefore, at the end of the day, they need a larger country where the supply of skilled labor, supply of, even lower skilled labor will not exhaust itself so quickly. So yes, there are hiccups along the way, but things are changing, continuously changing.
I wonder, though, Prime Minister Modi, he's all pro-growth and attracting new business to the country. That's at least what he claims. And I'm sure he also doesn't mind being a challenger to China in an economic sense. But I'm wondering, when you say, the urge has been there to really push ahead these reforms, why it is so hard to actually make them happen?
That's a part of, so a good example is the labor laws themselves. Now, what has happened is that these are central labor laws, but the states write part of the rules that are required to implement the laws. And some of the states have not written the rules. So now if you're going to repeal the old central government laws, all the states have to do it simultaneously. And so you got 2 or 3 recalcitrant states which haven't done it. So the whole set of labor laws are stuck. So it is partly, in the politics of it, partly it also the bureaucracy moves very slowly. And the third factor, very important one is that the entire system in India, the bureaucratic system, is multi-layered. You remove one regulation, there is another one that kicks in, which has to be removed as well before you can get the market to working. And that has been the frustration. There are all sorts of layers which have been removed in the last 20 years, and still something else comes to. And as I said, the bureaucracy really moves in India very slowly. Even a prime minister like Modi, it cannot get some of these things changed because the bureaucracy plays it very slowly. When he asks for progress, and say, yes, sir, progress is happening. We have just taken such and such action, but that's not the final action. You still need a few more. And so delays happen. Actually, even a very strong prime minister ultimately has to work within that system.
Right, and ultimately, when we're at this point in time now, when many companies want to pursue the China plus one strategy, or stronger pursue this strategy, what, in your point of view, what does India have as an advantage compared to China? I mean, they're both relatively large economies. They're pretty large economies. They're the two most populous countries in the world. Where are the advantages for India?
Yeah, China obviously is a very tough competition for India. The big advantage of India now is the differences in the wages. The per capita income today in China is about 5 times that of India, solidly in dollar terms. So that, of course, means significantly higher wages in China than in India, and all the studies actually show that. So that clearly is one big advantage India has. Productivity-wise, India still is very far from the productivity levels in China. And you can look at all the fast-growing economies. You see what happens is that for 3 decades, you grow about 8 to 10%. I'm talking about fast-growing economies like South Korea, Taiwan in the 60s and 70s, Singapore as well, China then after 1980s. But after about 3 decades, they begin to slow down. Productivity growth, once your per capita income has crossed a certain threshold, growth in productivity levels does peter out. It is still higher than in the United States or Europe, which are very mature economies, but it really takes a beating, and that slowdown is happening in China. India, on the other hand, is on the rising curve, rising trajectory of this. And so that is another factor, I think, which is helping India. And then, right now, I would say that politically, even though India is democracy and China is authoritarian, because authoritarianism also works both ways, that if the leader is very much driven to drive the economy, then it happens faster. But if the leader is actually going in the opposite direction, as seems to be the case currently, then an enormous amount of uncertainty arises. India, on the other hand, democracy's change tends to be slower, but India is very credible because of Prime Minister Modi, of the track record he has established in the last 9 years, and his messaging. So that is another factor, I think, obviously, and there's external politics as well. External politics is clearly against China right now because, one doesn't know how the United States, European countries are going to be treating China in the years to come. India, on the other hand, is building bridges with both Europe and China and the United States. So that factor also in the long term is working in India's favor.
Arvind Panagariya of Columbia University in New York, thank you for your thoughts.
My pleasure. Thank you.